Under no circumstances, you are promising America tonight, you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's not.
No, no.
That's not retribution.
I'm gonna be. You know, he keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no. Other than day one, we're closing the border." And we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
So that sounds to me like you're going back to the policies when you were president.
Whew. Look, I know you've seen that clip a few times. I know it's being run everywhere. Even President Biden's campaign is running it. But it really is important for you to hear that now, and especially for the framing, the conversation we have today here on Democracy. Dictator on day one. That's a key word, dictator on day one. And everybody's like trying to, your right's trying to blow it off and say, no, he just means he's going to get to work right away. But anybody who studied even an ounce of history knows nobody's a dictator for just one day. Trump is telling us what's coming. He's working with his propagandists like Sean Hannity to make sure we are asleep at the wheel and there's more coming. And how do we know they're taking it seriously? Well, because they're freaking telling us they're going to do it. There's just no doubt. I mean, let's be honest. The Trump campaign has now merged the Republican National Committee as one. There is only one Trump movement on the right. The party is now Trump. And his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is now the co-chairman of the Republican National Committee. And here she is explaining what's going to happen when Trump takes power.
Donald Trump gets in for 4 more years. The jig is up for them. The gloves are off. There are no holds barred here. He is going full throttle. He's not worried about winning another election. It's 4 years of scorched earth when Donald Trump retakes the White House.
So you got Trump saying, I'll be a dictator. You've got the head of the Republican Party saying, scorched earth. And she does say, well, he doesn't worry about re-election anymore because obviously what she's thinking is because he's going to be a second term and he can't run for re-election. But you and I also hear not worried about election ever again. Because that's what's in Project 2025 and elsewhere, right? A permanent Republican Party victory. That's what we face. Some would call it fascism, and they'd be right. And how do I know they'd be right? Because we've got an expert this week on the show in fascism. My friend Federico Finchelstein is going to join us. He just wrote a book, Wannabe Fascists, that's out this week. I've been looking forward to talking to him for a while. So you know what? Let's get on the show. I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP Wellman. You're right here on the Midas Touch Network. Let's get on with the show. Oh man, welcome. I am still Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP Wellman. You're in the right place, whether you found us somewhere on YouTube or right here in the Midas Touch Network. We're thrilled to have you. Timing is everything. As I mentioned in the opening bit there, we're looking at Trump being a dictator in day one. Lara Trump's promising us scorched earth. What a great time to have an author whose book just came out this week, Wannabe Fascists, Federico Finchelstein, world-renowned expert on fascism, populism, and dictatorship. Professor Finchelstein, professor of history at the New School for Social Research in Eugene Lang College in New York City. Federico, I've been meaning to get you on the show forever. Welcome to On Democracy, brother.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
That's great to have it. Congratulations on the book. It's terrific. I got a chance to read most of it. And I was saying at the beginning, you know, we had Ruth Benguiat here on the show last year, and her book, Strongmen's, usually sitting here in my bookshelf. And what I love about your book is it really does take a lot of the concepts that Ruth had talked about with Strongmen and goes into explaining why the Trump era is different. Now, I played that clip at the beginning, you know, a dictator in day one. And what does that scream to you? When you saw that clip, were you how far along in the book were you? When he gave you exactly the fourth pillar of your book?
Well, it was almost finished by then.
Wow.
Because in a way, for me, was what was the, let's say, the tipping point, sadly, was January 6th. Yeah. And in fact, even before, when I started the book, I said, you know, I mentioned that I wrote an op-ed as soon as Trump lost and was denying the electoral results. I wrote an op-ed at the Washington Post saying, well, if he keeps doing this, he's opening the possibility of a coup d'etat. And sadly, that happened some months later. And it's not that that I have the power of divination, but history helps. Because, we know this happened before. We know, Trump claims again and again that he's original, and he's not really that original. There are people like him. There were people like him before, and the difference is that perhaps they were not in power in the U.S. They were in power in other places. So of course there are some American distinctions about Trump and Trumpism, but he belongs to a long history that started with Hitler and Mussolini.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was kind of, hoping that this was not going to be the case as a citizen, but as an historian, I was pretty sure he was going in that direction. And sadly, after January 6th, of course, this glorification of the dictatorship or these promises of dictatorship can only add to what is a really worrying sign for America's future.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and you talk about that quite in the book. Now, you've entitled the book "Wannabe Fascist," and it's a unique thing. And I remember before I saw it coming out, before I got a chance to dig into it, it was intriguing to me. And you do explain why wannabe in I think in the introduction to the book. Tell us why it's wannabe fascist as opposed to the fascist or the American fascist.
Yes, I mean, because people like Trump, and again, I insist, he's not original. Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orban in Hungary, and Modi in India, and many other, Trump's cronies, international cronies, or even some people that want to be like Trump, such as Argentine President Milei, who I call a mini Trump.
Yeah.
So all these people, they are, they would like to go in a very radical direction. They would like to be dictators. They would like to be fascists, actually, and they cannot. And that, that doesn't mean that they can achieve that, but it means that they are not there yet. And in a way, the good part about that is that we have, all of us citizens who are, in favor of democracy, we have a lot of stuff to do in order to provide resistance towards those attempts, or a kind of it stops here. Now, of course, history shows that when people kind of enable or normalize these anti-democratic attempts, then they succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. We still have to fight, right? It's not going to be coming down to, you can just sit back and you just slide into these dictatorships, these fascist organizations, without even fighting back. And I guess it's also that lackluster sort of people who just don't want to participate in the process and don't realize what we're going to face if it happens. And in the book you use. I like the model you used, that it's use these 4 pillars of fascism as a guide to the book, and you're framing how Trumpism and MAGA is morphing from populism, which we'll talk about more later, to a more modern version of fascism. And you make the case that Trump had already crossed off the first 3 of those pillars during his first term, right? And the 4th appears, which is, by the way, that word dictator. and there's a thread, and I think you wrote an article today, as a matter, there's an article in the New Republic along those lines of literally wanting to be a dictator is how we opened the show with that clip. Can you walk us through those 4 pillars so people understand the framing of the book and then the framing of what you describe as the 4 pillars of fascism?
Yes. And, as any other person that, my job is, and my work is as an expert on fascism.
Yeah.
And of course, we study this, I have studied this for 3 decades now. And there are a lot of technicalities and there are a lot of specificities that I wanted to avoid in this book. Because outside of the academy, which is my job, I have a life. And in that life, many people from all walks of life, they ask me, you work on fascism, you are an expert on fascism. What is fascism? Yeah. And, the typical, answer within the academy will be, let's take a seminar, let's read a couple of books, and so on, which is great, but there is no time. And some people do not have, either because they finish college, or they are not in that situation, they don't have the time, basically, to study, the issue as it needs to be studied, I guess. And then I draw upon my expertise. I try to answer this, in the same way that I have been answering this in conversations, which is, 2-3 minutes. Tell me what fascism is. And fascism is many things, but if we have to basically bring it down to 4 elements, four elements where, without these 4 elements, there is no fascism. Okay. And these elements are, number 1, violence and the militarization of politics. We can talk about, I would first mention them, and if you like, we can go a little bit, over them. Yeah. Because the idea is to assess how much of that Trump is. Yeah. In that sense, right? So the first is violence and the militarization of politics. The second one is fascist lies and totalitarian propaganda. The third, number 3, is the politics of xenophobia, extreme demonization, racism, and number 4, yes, dictatorship. I mean, all of them can exist independently of each other. And for example, you can have racism without fascism, and you can have dictatorship without fascism. But there is no fascism without racism, without totalitarian lies, without militarization of politics, and without dictatorship. So these elements, when they are together, we are talking about a kind of, fascist minimum, if you will, like a minimal kind of definition of what fascism is. And then, this is a history. So the book has 4 chapters, and each chapter is dedicated to one of these pillars. There is a chapter on violence, one chapter on xenophobia, etc., one on lies, and another one on dictatorship. And I analyzed 3 waves of 3 cycles, 3 waves of authoritarianism in the last 100 years or more, which is, first, we have classic fascism. Hitler, Mussolini, those people that were in power, they were quite extreme. They really pushed these 4 elements to the limit. I mean, this was not only a dictatorship, but a radical one, a totalitarian one. They not only lie and did propaganda, but they did propaganda, as Orwellian as let's say, as lying as it could be, or as fantasy as it could be, a religious cult as it could be. And the same with, of course, violence. We know how violent they were. They, the Holocaust, other genocides, colonial, killing machines, and of course the Second World War. Now, after 1945, these people, of course, as everybody knows, they are defeated, and it's not that fascism disappears, but it disappears from power. I mean, you no longer have, after 1945, fascists in power. People like Hitler, Mussolini, you will not see them in government. This, of course, doesn't mean that they are, that they disappear. They are all over the place, but they cannot reach government.
Right.
Because, now we are talking about, after 1945, about a bipolar world that replaces, the Soviet Union, America, socialism, and liberal democracy, or all this bipolar situation, typical of the Cold War, replaces a tripolar world, like 3 isms they were before 1945. Not only socialism and liberalism, but also, or communism or capitalism, but also fascism. Now, the point is, in that kind of bipolar situation, people that had been fascists, people that had been dictators, they are not happy, of course. They neither like communism nor they like liberal democracy. So they recreate, or there is a kind of, construction of a new ism, which is populism. And populism in power, then it's a kind of reformulation of fascism for democratic times, which is to say, is no longer fascist. It is authoritarian. It carries important authoritarian elements from fascism, but it's no longer fascist because, of course, now it accepts elections, it accepts electoral outcomes, and it accepts defeat at the ballot box. So the first example of that kind of new authoritarianism are Juan Perón in Argentina, which, by the way, is my country, Getulio Vargas in Brazil, and first in other Latin American places, then in Europe and elsewhere. Now, that is the kind of second wave, which lasts basically from 1945 to the early 2000s, until people like Trump happens. And then I talk about a wave number 3, a third wave, in which populism, which had rejected these 4 pillars, or at least it was not really extreme in terms of these 4 pillars, and certainly was not dictatorial in terms of the pillar number 4, populism now, with people like Trump, Bolsonaro, Orban, and others, it seems to be returning to these 4 pillars. So let's talk, for example, about xenophobia, extreme hatred, and racism. How Trump launches his campaign, the first presidential campaign. He goes to Trump Tower, and he basically engages in a tirade against Mexicans who he called rapists. Now, criminals and rapists. So basically, it used to be the case that when people, politicians like that, engage in such racism and such xenophobia, voters were kind of, it would not find it very appealing. So in other words, it was toxic to the electorate. Now, no longer the case.
Right.
And this, and people like Trump return to this element. This element, by the way, German social democrats used to call this, anti-Semitism and racism, the socialism of the imbecile. Because it's not really socialism in terms of redistribution, but rather the idea that people feel inequality and they sell them hatred. So, which is, of course, a very free thing to give. They don't give them anything. But, they are still, living under conditions that they are not happy about, but somehow hatred fills the void. Now, this kind of, and this, of course, is Trump, right?
Right.
What did he do in terms of, let's say, fighting inequality? Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Because in democracy, the idea is that progressively, we all become more equal in terms of in a political sense, in an economic sense, that people have better lives, and so on and so forth. And in that sense, Trump gives the opposite, basically giving a lot of benefits to the top while giving a lot of hatred, to the below.
Right.
And that is a typical fascist thing to do. So that's number one. And if you want, we can talk about the others. But,
I think people jump out when you say it. I'll give you an example. I'm here in Missouri, and we were watching the local news last night, and there was multiple commercials, and all of the Republican candidates for governor and another one I think was Secretary of State, Attorney General, all highlighted the Mexican border. Saying, well, every state, and I live in Missouri. We're not near the Mexican border, right? We're not being overwhelmed by illegal immigrants. But literally every single Republican candidate running for office was showing pictures of mobs storming the gates, storming the fence there, or one guy's whole thing was China is sending fentanyl through the border with all these Mexican immigrants, and it's just rampant xenophobia as the basis of a campaign beyond president. That's why I think it's fascinating too. And when we talk about this and the growth of the MAGA movement, right? It's beyond Trump at this point. The entire Republican Party that's part of the MAGA movement has defined themselves. It's not just, I think that's the piece we've changed in the last 4 years, is the entire party now is on board with those pillars as well, that they're willing to give. The fact that they're wearing the same clothes to go meet him at the courthouse. We had this week, congressmen and senators showing up at the courthouse in New York, basically wearing his stupid outfit, the blood red tie, white shirt, blue, almost a uniform, one could say, to support this man who's a criminal defendant right now. You can see how it's bled its way into the party. And you grew, as you've mentioned, you can hear from your accent, you grew up in Argentina in the 70s, 80s. You've got personal experience living under fascism and dictatorship. How does that inform your view of all? It's more than just academic for you, right? This is your life experience in a lot of ways, isn't it?
Yeah, in many ways, I know it when I see it, but also, I
know what it looks like.
But also, in terms of, that is the experience that, because I would experience to somehow firsthand, like how terrible it was to just turn on the TV and listen to this incredible lying apparatus, totalitarian lies, and so on, to this glorification of violence, to the lack of rights. This actually prompted me to dedicate my life to research this, because it's, after these experiences, like basically what I wanted to know is how a country that in many ways is very modern and very secular and even progressive in many ways,
and educated,
could really return or, somehow, go into such barbaric dimension. Such a barbaric reality. And of course, what you were suggesting, I think it's very important that it takes two for tango. And it's not, the propaganda talks about this kind of omniscient, omnipresent, and overpowering Trump. But in fact, often he's driven by his own followers, by the MAGA movement in terms of, going in a more extremist way. Nothing new about all these people wearing Trump costumes or appearing as mini Trumps, literally. What lack of self-esteem and personality it takes to be dressing like that. You are no longer an individual in its own, with its own self, but rather a mere copy of the sleeping guy. Yeah. Now, the point is that the point is that this happened before, and in fact, a great historian of Nazism, Jon Kershaw, talks in his book about the Hitler myth, about all these mini Hitlers that existed, people that, even were wearing the Hitler mustache and so on. They are like mini Hitlers that want to imitate and copy from the leader. So basically, that belongs wrongly and in a very distorting manner to what it shouldn't be, because it presents itself as a religion. And religion is not about that. I mean, religion is not about a kind of political leader who equates himself with God. But that is very interesting because, you know, in the context of religion, what is central to religion, and rightly so, is faith. Because if somebody is asking a religion for empirical demonstration, that is the wrong question to ask. And that already shows that this person probably doesn't need or doesn't understand religion, right? Because if you say, show me proof of God, then you don't understand what faith is.
Yep.
Now, and that is totally, and of course, legitimate in the sense of within religion. Now, what these kind of movements do is they take that, they steal that from religion in order to, to displace it to the sphere of politics. And now they demand the same. So they demand from the leader, they want not an explanation, not empirical reality, but faith, as if the leader was a sort of God. So my point is, for them, it doesn't matter whether what Trump says is real or not. It's enough that he's saying it. So he, in a way, you can see how blasphemous, even from within, a religious explanation this is, because this is about making a man a sort of God. I mean, and in political terms. So that's why we talk about political religion when we analyze this. And of course, that's what Nazism was about. Now, all these elements are tied together in a way, because the idea is that, the violence that all this implies is deeply tied to the lies and the totalitarian propaganda that are needed to, for the two of them to work in tandem. And the same happens, of course, with extreme hatred, and eventually dictatorship is the best means for them to really win. Now, of course, I'm kind of, a big part of me is, optimistic, and we are not there. I mean, and even if he wins, he might not reach this kind of fascist situation because it's not that easy. No. But the risk and the red flags are all over the place.
Let's take a break there. It's a perfect place because I want to go with that next part. And when we get back, so we've got great sponsors again, as always, our friends at Human and Neurohacker. So let's talk to them and we'll come right back. When we talk about SuperBeets Heart Chews Advanced, we talk about the 3-in-1 mixture of support they give. And my 3-in-1 is, I am as you guys know, I'm a podcast host. I'm also a hiker, and I'm a parent and a grandparent, and I need support for a healthy lifestyle. And the great thing about SuperBeets Chews Advanced is they have the added support of CoQ10 and blood pressure support. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the grapeseed extract in SuperBeets is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than just a healthy lifestyle alone, which I've been trying to live. New SuperBeets Heart Chews Advanced supports healthy CoQ10 level and an important nutrient for heart health, which I live for. The thing I love about the chews is this. One, they taste great. I mean, you get a lot of supplements that aren't great. They're kind of like drinking chalk. But SuperBeets Heart Chews actually taste good. I fit them right in my daily lifestyle. They give me an energy boost. They give me a mind boost when I'm going out to go for a walk. I'm working in the garden for a few hours. I feel good knowing that I'm getting that heart healthy help and support for a healthier lifestyle, which I need after being a veteran of the Army for 22 years. And I have a lot of beat up body parts, and it takes a lot for me to keep on going every day. And I am happy to say that SuperBeets Heart Chews help me keep that going. Now, CoQ10 generates 95% of the cellular energy that your heart needs in your body, but it can decline with age, stress, and a statin use if you're on statins, which I'll be honest, I have some heart healthy methods I take myself. So it's an effective and clinically researched ingredients like SuperBeets. They're the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended best brand of beets for cardiovascular health support. So find out how you can get a free 30-day supply on bundles of new SuperBeets Heart Chews Advanced and save 15% for a limited time only by going to superbeetsradio.com and use the promo code FRED. That's SuperBeets, BEETS, radio.com, promo code FRED. Find out how you're getting a discount, get a bundle of these great products that I use daily and stand behind. Thanks so much for supporting our show. If someone told me there are science-backed ingredients that could help me feel 15 years younger in just a matter of months, I wouldn't have believed it. Well, then I tried Qualia Senolytics. As we age, everyone accumulates senescent cells in their body. Senescent cells cause symptoms of aging, such such as aches and pains, slow workout recoveries, sluggish mental and physical energy that I know so well, all associated with that middle-aged feeling. Now, also known as zombie cells, they're old and worn out and serving a no useful function for your health anymore, but they're taking up space and nutrients from our healthy cells. You know, much like pruning the yellow and dead leaves and plants in my garden, Qualia senolytic removes those worn out senescent cells to allow for the rest of them to thrive in your body. You take it just 2 days a month. The formula is non-GMO, vegan, as well as gluten-free, and the ingredients are meant to complement one another, factoring in the combined effect of all the ingredients together. But best of all, on top of all that, you have a 100-day money-back guarantee. And since taking Qualia Senolytics, I have had higher energy levels. I feel 15 years younger, more productive, enthusiastic in life. Not to mention, importantly for me, less aches and pains. Now, resist aging at the cellular level. Try Qualia Senolytic. Go to neurohacker.com/Fred for up to $100 off, and then use code FRED at checkout for an additional 15% off. That's neurohacker.com/Fred for an extra 15% off of your purchase. And man, thanks Neurohacker for sponsoring our show. You know, we left off with that discussion of where they got to go, right? What's next? Will Trump be able to reach that next level? And one of the things I talk about a lot in the show is this Project 2025 and its cousin Agenda 47 that are the roadmaps for a second Trump term. And they have alarming ideas like deploying the military to suppress protests, dismantling the civil service as we know it, putting true believers at every level of government. And for me, and I love your take on this, in my mind, it represents a real shift of that cult of personality, of populism of the first term and the three pillars you talked about. It was sort of a cult of personality in a lot of ways. For example, like I think of the example of that is, if you remember, the Republican National Committee platform for the 2020 National Convention was literally whatever Trump wants, which was bizarre, but that's what it was. But now they're coming in with an entire form of government they've built, an authoritarian governance. Does that change? Now, we don't really talk about it in the book per se, but it does kind of play into me, because fascism, the concept of fascism, was Mussolini's idea and a form of government that he created. And I've never known a lot of populists come in and say this is going to be the type of government. But that's what, to me, the Project 2025 represents is a really a fascist form of government. Is that how you see it as well with your studies?
Well, at least that is a risk. I mean, to say the least, that is a potential risk.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that, let's start with what is a dictatorship. I mean, in a let me say three things, because of course we can engage in a very long definition, but I will say three things. The first is that it's a form of permanent power. That is to say that it doesn't matter, whether a person wins an election or not, because that person, because of all this, appropriation of religion that we were talking about, that person is supposed to be let's say, the eternal representative of the people, and it doesn't matter whether people vote for this person or not. So that's the kind of a rationale or the mentality. So that's one. And that's why, had Trump remained in power after January 6th, I mean, the outcome of that would have been, at least nominally, dictatorship, in the sense that if he remained in power without winning elections, that is what he becomes a dictator. I mean, that's as simple as that. Now, in dictatorship, there is increasingly and eventually the elimination of distinctions between the state and society, meaning everything is the state. And in a context of a fascist dictatorship, the state also becomes the person. So there is no distinction also then between the leader and the state. First, there is no distinction, and we see this already, between the party and the leader. At this point, we can say that is what happened,
with the merger. The merger of the RNC, right? The merger of the RNC with the Trump campaign. That's a huge step, isn't it?
Yes, as it happened with the Nazis and the fascists, by the way.
Yeah.
But that is not, that doesn't mean we are in a fascist situation, but it's going into that. That's why I call this wannabe fascism, not a full-fledged fascism. And then you have also the lack of, our relation with, our connection to that is that eventually what is private and what is public loses its kind of meaning, and there are no distinctions.
Okay.
Because in the sense that whatever, even if you criticize the leader in totalitarian dictatorships, that is the case. You criticize the leader in the privacy of your home, and it doesn't matter because you are, that is not permitted. And in the case of fascism, and we need to remember this, Because a typical dictatorship is not that the law doesn't exist, but rather that the law becomes a facade. Meaning, like every situation which involves the political or involves the will of the leader becomes, supersedes legality. That is, that if Trump believes that, for example, or Hitler or whoever is in that role, believes that, what you wrote in your book or what you said in your program is not okay, even if there is no law that says that is illegal, then it becomes illegal.
Right.
So, and then but that is a kind of process in which takes time. And then what is, what is not part of the political remains under the rule of law. Let's say I want to have 2 coffees instead of 1. That is okay insofar as it doesn't relate to the political. And then people say, "Oh, you see that there is legality, but only for things which are not political." And eventually, in a fascist regime, almost everything becomes political. Mussolini, for example, at some point, in Spanish or in Italian too, like there are 2 ways of saying "you," an informal and a formal, and he wanted to replace the way people talk, or he hated that Italians made a lot of gestures with the hands, and he wanted to change even that. I mean, how political is that? Wow. Well, for him it was. So the point is these are extreme examples, right? And then, there are many ways in which we can stop this. So my point is what I want to say with this book is that these wannabe fascists want to go there. They would like to do it, but it is not a foregone conclusion that they will reach the fascist stage. And partly because, or to a big extent, because of us, because many people do not agree with that. And there are many things that you can do in order to prevent those efforts.
And that's a great place to go. So, I always try to finish our show on an optimistic note. And you said you're an optimist, which I really appreciate, because for some reason I still am, even after being a helicopter pilot, which is the least optimistic people on earth, and an army officer, which makes me even less optimistic. And I think when I started this show a year and a half ago, we were very upset when people got upset when we used the word fascist to describe the MAGA movement, right? But it feels like a lot of experts and amateurs like me and you are more comfortable with that word, and you see it being used more. But by that same token, you said something really key at the end of that last question, which is, it's up to us. I mean, it doesn't, for them to reach that 4th layer of dictatorship and the things they have to do, we can stop them if we stand up, right? So I think what are the signs for our, because I'm so blessed to be in the Midas Touch Network and these great fans we have for On Democracy is there's literally thousands, even hundreds of thousands. What should they look for, and what can we do to ensure this doesn't occur?
Well, the first one is it's important to vote.
Yeah.
And for people that do not agree with the anti-democratic project, the racist project, the xenophobic project, the potentially dictatorial project that Trump represents, they should vote for the other candidate. And this is no time, in my view, history shows us there is no time for being picky, even if you either don't like the other candidate or don't agree with many things that are going on, either nationally or internationally, in the sense of the position vis-a-vis democracy and these other elements, violence, racism, and so on. Well, Trump is worse because he's not into democracy. So that I think that is very important. The other one is the need to, protest if you want to protest. The need to, read, listen, and be informed, and and energize and respect and support independent journalism and independent opinions, because that is important, because we are facing propaganda that doesn't rely on facts, whereas it's important to read and to listen to empirical information. So that is extremely important. That's why people like Trump, as Mussolini and Hitler before, they hate the media, they hate journalism, because actually they provide facts for the people to judge.
Yep.
And to make, to have their opinion rather, and here is important, an opinion which should be based on facts and not on faith. In politics, faith is a problem. It involves an authoritarian bent insofar as if you don't agree with those who have faith, what are you?
Right.
An unbeliever, a kind of heretic,
A heretic,
like,
yeah.
and so on and so forth. So that is extremely important. And now, I mean, the part that doesn't depend on us as well is that, or at least in some of us, like, is that I'm not a member of the judiciary. I'm not a member of the armed forces. I'm not a member of a conservative party. I mean, let's focus first on the state, which is in countries where the armed forces or the judiciary or both sided with the wannabe dictator rather than with the constitution, fascism won. I mean, that is what happened in Nazi Germany.
Yep.
That, with the army as well as with the judiciary, actually both. The same happened in Italy and also with the monarchy. I mean, and then, I mean, so that is like, it's important, and that is a line of defense. For example, in Brazil, the judiciary is prosecuting Bolsonaro in ways that, in my opinion, this country should emulate, because
right.
Bolsonaro attempted a coup d'etat, and Bolsonaro now cannot present himself in elections, and Bolsonaro is prosecuted and investigated, as it should be, for any attempt at a coup d'etat. Because, by the way, your listeners might remember that just 1 year after Trump, Bolsonaro attempted the same. He lost elections. There was a mob, and they tried to do a coup d'etat in Brazil.
Yep.
And judiciary, especially the judiciary in that country, it really said, no, this is extremely illegal, because it was, and they sided with the constitution. In this country, what is important also, I mean, and perhaps more important at the time of the coup attempt, was the position of the armed forces, and especially of the top brass, in which actually the most important military person in the country saw the parallels between what Trump was doing and Hitler himself.
Yeah.
And this is important. I think the Constitution is way more important than one's own political opinion or one's own political choice when, for example, serving in the military. And in democracies that were able to defend themselves against anti-democratic fascist attempts, the military sided with the Constitution. So my point is, like, all these things are important in defending democracy. I mean, us citizens, not related to the state, participating in many ways or as much as possible in the democratic process. And then we should encourage, support, and ask for members, of different state institutions to remember that they need to serve the Constitution and not the person, not the wannabe fascist leader.
Yeah. That's a key, and it reminds me about what I did during the Lincoln Project. My first job at the Lincoln Project 4 years ago was as the veteran and military family advisor and community organizer, and that's one of the things we did actually echo, and quite a bit of our messaging was to the military members, like, remember your oath to the Constitution, not to a man. It's the Constitution we serve, not this current man. And I think they did pass that test. It was touch and go for a minute, but I do think they passed the test. There is fear that it might not, if again. They had a lot of practice, as my friend Rick Wilson says. A coup that goes a coup attempt unpunished is practice. So, but I do have high hopes. I still do believe in my military peers. My own son-in-law still serves in the military. That they do know what their right and wrong is, no matter what their political views are. They do know that we do not want a dictatorship in this country. Well, I don't know. I could talk to you all day. This is fascinating. I appreciate you so much. We're thrilled that we got to see you. One of the first people you're doing in your press tour. Welcome. Tell people where they can find you, and more importantly, where can they find the book? Because I'm telling you, readers and viewers or listeners, this is a great book. It's very readable. It's a fast read. It'll open your eyes to a lot of things. So tell where we can find it and find you.
Well, I mean, they can ask the book in independent libraries. They can find it in the website of UC Press, and of course also in Amazon.
Great, love it. And where can we find you online, sir?
Well, I'm on what used to be called Twitter.
That's how I found you.
You put my surname there, I will be there. And then if people want to write to me, they can put my name and go to the university website, and there is my email there, which is public.
Very open about that, and I appreciate that. Federico, I enjoyed talking to you. A lot of your writing, you just got a new piece in the New Republic as well. We'll put a link up to that later, but thank you for doing this. Thanks for joining us. It's interesting to me too, Federico, as we wrap, you said so many interesting things. On my last few shows, it's interesting how they've led into this. We had a wonderful person who explained how the Christian nationalism has morphed into the MAGA movement. last week I had Mark Jacob talk about how the media has failed to stop the propaganda and spreading the lies. And then here you are talking about those very elements that go into what would be a fascism in America, what it would look like. Those are the key elements to it. So it feels like I'm inadvertently building a team. So what do you know? I'm actually putting together something like that. So that's fantastic. I appreciate it. So without any further ado, Federico, thank you for joining us. Good luck with the book. Thank you for everything you do for our democracy here in America.
Thank you very much.
Good talking to you. Yeah, what a great conversation. Federico is brilliant. I can see why he's a professor teaching this for a living, and his lived experience that leads into this. So it really was perfect timing as we've had these shows talking about these elements of our democracy, which is what this show is about. For those of you who followed us for, I don't know how long it's been, a year and a half, those new to it, we're talking about these elements of our democracy. That's why it's on democracy. The elements of the media, the elements of even religion in our nation like ours does play a part in this. And of course, this political movement that is the MAGA movement, which is morphing into something slightly terrifying. You know, I do talk about Project 2025 a lot because to me, it really strikes me as a blueprint for an authoritarian government movement that they're desperately trying to just sell us as nothing more than a policy. And if you know about Project 2025, yes, the Heritage Foundation has for years issued a blueprint for every new Republican administration every 4 years, and it's been written by Heritage. This year, they've gotten over $25 million. There's 90 plus organizations who have issued a 4,000 page, some ridiculously large document that has secret elements they haven't released because they know we'll attack it, that have the authoritarian elements of using the military against peaceful protests, breaking the civil service to replace permanent, political appointees, to openly talking about essentially dismantling our voting system and placing a dictatorship for permanent governance. The Project 2025 sounds so innocuous, no big deal. Hey, you lefties are just overreacting. There you are again. Look at them, hysterical. Boy, we triggered the lefties. That's all an attempt for us to say it doesn't matter, but it does. They have a plan. They learned their lessons, and the plans are fucking terrifying. And that's my first F-bomb on the show. It is terrifying. If you're not terrified by it, you're not paying attention. And don't let the far right convince you you're just being hysterical, because you're not. You're not. Which is why we do things like this show, why you guys are the Mightiest Mighty and you're participating, why you support guests like this and politicians that we could support. I hope you're catching that part of this. As you had said, vote. I've been trying to introduce you to a lot of our wonderful Democratic nominees and candidates across the country. Last one, we had Caitlin Draper, who's running in Arkansas against Steve Womack. Fascinating conversation. Those are all on the Midas Touch Network called In the Hot Seat with FP Wellman. You can look them up there. There's some amazing ones. I have got some really cool ones lined up for next week. 2 Senate nominees, a great congressional nominee. I'm actually going to talk to the party chair, the Democratic party chair in North Carolina, who's doing incredible things in North Carolina, Clayton Anderson. So I'll tell you, if you're not catching the In the Hot Seats, I hope you will, because I'm really enjoying doing them and doing them. And then once again, I'd love you to learn more about Forgotten Democrats. That's ForgottenDemocrats.org, where we are talking about this, where we're feeding and trying to help these Democratic candidates who need the most help, who have the least money, and give them money first. So check out Forgotten Dems. In the meantime, Substack, social media, you know where I am, you know how to find me. If you're new to the show, just Google me. It's a very unique name. In the meantime, it's been a great week. It's been a fascinating week. Trump's trial gets more interesting. They underestimated Michael Cohen. You can find him right here on the Midas Touch Network. Everyone underestimated him. I had the opportunity to work with Michael Cohen when I was at the Lincoln Project and since, and do not underestimate the intelligence and perseverance of that man. He is, at first glance, you think, oh, that guy's really smart, and he's showing everybody how smart he is in this Trump trial. So it will be very interesting to see how that turns out. Not to mention the humor of seeing Lauren Boebert get hazed. So thank you for joining us. We can't wait to see you next week. Check out the latest In the Hot Seats as they coming your way. And remember, you can change this. The key that Federico said at the end there, and I say to you every week, is this is in our hands. You can participate in your democracy. Start right at home. Call your local candidate, your local Democratic candidate. Call your school board candidate. See how you can help. It's not just money. I don't expect you to give them money. It's great if you can, but you can certainly give your blood, sweat, and tears to save our democracy. With that, we'll see you next week.